Imagine a continent rich with diverse cultures, vast natural resources, and intricate societies, yet relatively untouched by European powers for centuries. Then, within a few decades, almost the entire landmass is partitioned, controlled, and exploited by foreign nations. This is the remarkable yet tragic story of how Europe colonized Africa. From the feverish expeditions of explorers like David Livingstone and Henry Morton Stanley to the ruthless exploitation of African resources and people, the colonization of Africa reshaped the continent in ways still felt today. Let's delve into this captivating history, uncovering the motives, methods, and impacts of European colonization. Welcome to Zain Facts Channel. Today we explore the fascinating and complex history of how Europe colonized Africa. We'll uncover the key events, influential figures, and significant impacts of this era, providing you with a detailed and engaging narrative. Stay tuned and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more intriguing content. The early interactions and the scramble for Africa. European contact with Africa dates back to ancient times, but significant interaction began during the Age of Exploration in the 15th century. The Portuguese were the pioneers, establishing trade routes and forts along the West African coast. However, it wasn't until the 19th century that the so-called Scramble for Africa truly began. The Industrial Revolution in Europe created an insatiable demand for raw materials, and Africa's vast resources presented a lucrative opportunity. Interesting fact: the African Association, founded in 1788 by wealthy Englishmen, sought to explore Africa and locate the fabled city of Timbuktu and the source of the Niger River. This ignited a wave of European expeditions into the heart of Africa, leading to the mapping of previously uncharted territories and the discovery of rich mineral deposits. Interesting fact: the Berlin Conference of 1884–85, attended by representatives from 14 European powers, regulated the colonization and trade in Africa. This conference formalized the division of Africa, with only Liberia and Ethiopia remaining independent by 1914. This division often ignored the continent's complex ethnic and cultural landscapes, sowing seeds of future conflicts. Motivations behind colonization. Several factors drove the European colonization of Africa. Economic interests were paramount as Europe sought new markets and raw materials to fuel its industrial revolution. Africa offered abundant natural resources such as gold, diamonds, rubber, and ivory. Political motives were also significant, with nations like Britain, France, and Germany vying for global dominance. The acquisition of colonies was seen as a matter of national prestige and power. Interesting fact: the abolition of the slave trade created a need for new forms of commerce between Europe and Africa. Explorers and traders identified resources like rubber, coffee, and palm oil, which became the backbone of the new legitimate trade. These commodities were crucial for European industries, especially during the Industrial Revolution. Interesting fact: the invention of quinine in 1817 allowed Europeans to survive the ravages of malaria, making deeper penetration into the African interior possible and facilitating the colonization process. Before quinine, malaria had been a significant barrier to European exploration and colonization in Africa, earning the continent the moniker "White Man's Grave." Methods of colonization. Colonization was achieved through various methods, including treaties, military conquest, and economic exploitation. European powers used advanced military technology and strategies to overpower African states. Treaties, often signed under duress or through deception, secured European control over vast territories. Economic exploitation involved the extraction of resources and the establishment of plantations, often at the expense of local populations. Interesting fact: Henry Morton Stanley, famed for his explorations, played a pivotal role in King Leopold II of Belgium's acquisition of the Congo Free State. Stanley's treaties with local chiefs laid the groundwork for one of the most brutal colonial regimes in history. The exploitation and atrocities committed in the Congo Free State led to millions of deaths and widespread suffering. Interesting fact: European powers used steamships to navigate Africa's rivers, allowing them to access and control inland regions. These vessels, armed and equipped with steam engines, revolutionized the exploration and colonization of Africa. Rivers like the Congo and Niger became critical arteries for the movement of goods and troops. The impact of colonization on Africa was profound and multifaceted. It disrupted traditional societies, economies, and political structures. The arbitrary borders drawn by Europeans often ignored ethnic and cultural boundaries, leading to conflicts that persist to this day. Colonization also introduced new technologies, religions, and systems of governance, which had lasting effects on African societies. Interesting fact 7. The introduction of European patronage altered African art and culture. While some traditional practices were suppressed, others adapted to new forms and influences, creating a unique blend of old and new. For example, the blending of African and European artistic styles led to the creation of new genres of art and music. Interesting fact 8. The exploitation of African labor and resources fueled European industrialization and wealth, but it also led to widespread suffering and resistance. Movements for independence and decolonization gained momentum in the mid-20th century, ultimately leading to the end of colonial rule. The struggle for independence was often marked by violent conflicts and significant loss of life. Colonial administrations varied between European powers, but generally involved the establishment of centralized control over African territories. The British often employed a system of indirect rule, using existing local power structures to enforce colonial policies. The French, on the other hand, pursued a policy of assimilation, attempting to integrate Africans into French culture and society. Interesting fact 9. The British policy of indirect rule in Nigeria involved working with local emirs and chiefs to govern, which maintained some semblance of traditional authority while ensuring British control. This system, however, often led to the empowerment of compliant leaders at the expense of traditional governance structures. Interesting fact 10. In contrast, the French policy of assimilation aimed to transform Africans into French citizens, complete with French education and cultural practices. This policy was most rigorously applied in Senegal, where the 4 communes were granted full French citizenship. Resistance to colonial rule was widespread and took many forms, from passive resistance and non-cooperation to armed rebellions. Leaders like Samurai Touré in West Africa, Menelik II of Ethiopia, and the Zulu king Cetshwayo led significant military resistance against European forces. Interesting fact 11. The Battle of Adwa in 1896 was a significant victory for Ethiopia under Emperor Menelik II, who successfully repelled Italian forces. This victory secured Ethiopia's sovereignty and became a symbol of African resistance against European colonization. Interesting fact 12. The Maji Maji Rebellion in German East Africa, modern-day Tanzania, from 1905 to 1907, was one of the largest uprisings against colonial rule. Despite its ultimate failure, it demonstrated the widespread discontent with European exploitation and oppression. Economic exploitation was at the heart of colonial endeavors. European powers extracted vast amounts of resources, including minerals, agricultural products, and labor. This extraction often involved forced labor, oppressive taxation, and harsh working conditions. The economic benefits of these activities flowed primarily to Europe, leaving African economies underdeveloped and dependent. Interesting fact 13. The construction of infrastructure, such as railways and ports, was primarily aimed at facilitating the extraction and export of resources. The Uganda Railway, built by the British, connected the interior of East Africa to the port of Mombasa, enabling the efficient transport of goods like coffee and tea. Interesting fact 14. King Leopold II of Belgium infamously exploited the Congo Free State for its rubber and ivory, resulting in the deaths of millions of Congolese. The brutal regime employed forced labor, mutilations, and violence to meet production quotas, causing international outrage and eventually leading to reforms. Cultural and social changes. Colonization brought significant cultural and social changes to African societies. European missionaries played a crucial role in spreading Christianity, often establishing schools and hospitals. This led to the displacement of traditional religions and cultural practices, although many African communities blended new religious practices with indigenous beliefs. Interesting fact 15. The establishment of mission schools provided education to many Africans, but it also served as a tool for cultural assimilation. Prominent African leaders such as Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya and Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana received their education in mission schools, which influenced their later roles in the independence movements. Interesting fact 16. Despite efforts to suppress traditional cultures, many African communities maintained and adapted their cultural practices. For example, the Yoruba people of Nigeria blended Christian practices with their traditional religious beliefs, creating unique religious expressions like the Aladura churches. Decolonization and Legacy. The mid-20th century saw a wave of decolonization movements across Africa. World War II had weakened European powers and inspired anti-colonial sentiments. African leaders, educated and inspired by both Western and indigenous philosophies, led their nations towards independence. The process of decolonization was often tumultuous, involving negotiations, political struggles, and in many cases, violent conflicts. Interesting fact 17. The Mau Mau uprising in Kenya from 1952 to 1960 was a significant armed resistance against British colonial rule. The rebellion was characterized by guerrilla warfare and harsh reprisals, ultimately leading to Kenya's independence in 1963. Interesting fact 18. Ghana, under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah, became the first sub-Saharan African country to gain independence from colonial rule in 1957. Nkrumah's vision of Pan-Africanism inspired other African nations to pursue independence, leading to a wave of decolonization across the continent. Post-Colonial Challenges. The legacy of colonization left many African nations grappling with numerous challenges. The arbitrary borders drawn by European powers created states with diverse and often conflicting ethnic groups, leading to internal conflicts and civil wars. Additionally, the colonial focus on extracting resources left many African economies dependent on a narrow range of exports, hindering economic diversification and development. Interesting fact 19. The Nigerian Civil War from 1967 to 1970, also known as the Biafran War, was partly a result of ethnic tensions exacerbated by colonial-era boundaries. The war resulted in significant loss of life and highlighted the deep-seated issues stemming from colonial rule. Interesting fact 20. Many African countries struggled with neocolonialism, where former colonial powers and multinational corporations continued to exert economic and political influence. This often resulted in economic policies that favored foreign interests over domestic development. Cultural renaissance and resilience. Despite the challenges, African nations have shown remarkable resilience and cultural renaissance. The post-colonial period has seen a resurgence of interest in traditional cultures, languages, and arts. African writers, musicians, and artists have gained international recognition, contributing to a global appreciation of African heritage. Interesting fact 21. The rise of African literature in the 20th century, with authors like Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, and Ngugi wa Thiong'o, played a crucial role in reclaiming African narratives and challenging colonial stereotypes. Interesting fact 22. The Afrobeat genre, pioneered by Nigerian musician Fela Kuti, combined traditional African music with jazz and funk, creating a powerful platform for social and political commentary. Modern Africa growth and opportunities. Today, Africa is a continent of growth and opportunities. Many African countries have experienced significant economic development, driven by investments in technology, infrastructure, and education. The African Union and regional organizations continue to work towards greater political and economic integration, aiming to create a more united and prosperous continent. Interesting fact 23. The African Continental Free Trade Area, launched in 2021, aims to create the world's largest free trade area, boosting intra-African trade and economic growth. Interesting fact 24. Africa is home to some of the fastest-growing economies in the world, with countries like Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Ghana experiencing rapid economic expansion in recent years. The colonization of Africa by European powers was a period of profound change and upheaval. While it brought technological advancements and new forms of governance, it also led to the exploitation, displacement, and suffering of millions of Africans. The impacts of colonization are still felt today, but African nations have shown incredible resilience and adaptability. By understanding this complex history, we can appreciate the struggles and triumphs of African societies and support their continued growth and development. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the colonization of Africa. If you found this content informative and engaging, please like, share, and subscribe to Zain Facts channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support helps us continue bringing you intriguing stories from history and beyond. Stay curious, and see you in the next video.